Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the 2024 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Sharon, and I'm a first-year MBA student here at MIT Sloan. I'm so proud to introduce our next panel. Seats at the Table, Empowering the Next Generation of Ownership and Changemakers. We're joined by a truly extraordinary group of panelists. The phrase champions and changemakers is what comes to mind when I think of them, and even that sounds like an understatement. Our panelists are Sue Bird, 4-time WNBA champion, 5-time Olympic gold medalist, and co-founder of A Touch More and Togethxr. Andre Iguodala, executive director of the National Basketball Players Association, as well as 4-time NBA champion and 2-time Olympic gold medalist. And Megan Rapinoe, soccer legend, 2-time World Cup champion, Olympic gold medalist, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, and co-founder of A Touch More. Moderating this panel, we have Hannah Storm, award-winning ESPN journalist, SportsCenter anchor, and producer and director of Brainstorming Productions. Just to make sure you all know how to submit your questions, please submit your questions within the Cadence app. The panel will run for 45 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes for questions at the end. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Hannah.
Yay, Sharon. I just want to say Sharon did an amazing job. So yeah, she did. We're all prepped up. Iggy, I'd love to start with you since you're sitting right here, and I think we go the furthest back of anybody on this panel. So I met Iggy before the Warriors' first championship, so before that dynasty started, and actually he graciously came off the bench, I think, for that first title, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is incredible, which now Klay Thompson is doing, which is just crazy. But at the time, you were playing, but you were meeting with all of these business people. So just give us a sense of, because we're talking to an audience of people who are going to be just getting started, right? Getting out there. Like what that was like you, while you were a player, starting your transition into business.
I think it was law of attraction, naturally. When you come into whatever your professional sport is, I think mainly the two sports with the most African American men and the backgrounds that we come from, you hear a lot of horror stories in terms of financial literacy, and so for me it was always being curious about the areas that were perceived as weaknesses, and so I was a math nerd in high school, middle school, and so what I would do is try to surround myself with individuals who were masters in the world that they come from and in the financial sector. And so for me, it was around the time the iPhone came out. I was a big Apple products guy, and so from that moment, I started looking at the stocks, and long story short, found out about the private sector and got with the folks to help me become a student of business. And lo and behold, Warriors at free agency, we were able to make a trade, but knowing that that was a city that I would love to play in because of the private sector of tech and trying to marry the two. So the basketball became really good, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and have that opportunity where the basketball team was really, really good in that market, and then the market provided something else outside of the sport that I can dive into, and it was just perfect timing.
Yeah, what about you, Megan? At what point in your career, which, you're such a decorated athlete, but in what point in your career did that spark come, or did those connections come that made you even want to have a bigger impact?
I feel like it sort of was always there. I think even just, coming out in college, being a gay athlete, being a female athlete, sort of quickly having to learn and understand the inequalities that we were dealing with. The better you understand it, the more you can fight it. It's, it's sort of, the current is going, and it requires intention and education and a thoughtfulness to change a current. It's difficult. So I think kind of from the beginning I had a sense of it, but after 2015, after that World Cup win, sort of understanding how the landscape was changing. Even prior to that, honestly, 2011, that World Cup in Germany. Next year we win Olympic gold medal. Things are changing a little bit, and we could kind of feel the business around the team changing. You know, more sponsorships for us personally off the field. Certainly after 2015, you can see more fans in the crowd, but like we're not really benefiting in the way that I see it's growing and the way that the team sees it growing. I think the process around equal pay and, you know, eventually the lawsuit and settlement and everything, but I think it was really like around 2015, like I started vividly remember, I'm like, this isn't adding up. We have a ticker tape parade in New York and we're like, you know, flying home coach. I'm like, something is, I'm not a math major, but the math is not mathing here. So I think it was around then, it was like, okay, we need to now take this in our own hands. It's not, you know, we've sort of asked and tried to go through, you know, bargaining process and tried to go through other avenues, and that wasn't working, so we had to get a little bit more aggressive about it.
Yeah, I want to get into the lawsuit and everything coming up. And for Sue, I mean, you won 4 championships, so you're there in Seattle, which is another really, in terms of business, like a really progressive community there. You know, at what point did you become interested in your post-basketball life or during your basketball life really expanding?
Yeah, so I feel fortunate to say that I played overseas. I also would love for WNBA players to never have to play overseas. But because I was playing, it was a year-round schedule. And then I stopped doing that in 2014, I believe.
That was primarily in Russia.
Yeah, I played 10 years in Russia.
Right.
And so WNBA in the summer, overseas in the winter,
Right.
like I said, nonstop. But then when I stopped overseas and I was still playing in the WNBA, I now had all this free time. I had like 6-7 months where I got to try different things, learn about different things, come to conferences like this, meet different people. And I think to Iggy's point, just learn. Just try to learn and try to put myself in as many uncomfortable positions as I could to see what interests me, to see how I could stretch myself. And I was really lucky that I was able to do that while I was still playing. So I still had that like binky, right? Like my little blankie, I go back to the WNBA, I'm an athlete, we're good. But then in the off season, I can really stretch myself and again, figure out what it was that interests me. And then, you know, here I am as a retired athlete and I have tons of companies and businesses and interests to talk about. And a lot of it comes from those 6 or so years where in my off seasons, I got to check things out.
I really love, I see you nodding your heads. I mean, when you talk about placing yourself in an uncomfortable situation, you know, and that's something that we love to talk to young people about, like taking risks and doing things and not being afraid to fail, really getting out of your comfort zone. That's how you find opportunity. I can't imagine, Iggy, that you saw people who looked like you when you were in these rooms. Or how do you, now that you have MOSAIC, which, and just fill people in, because I know Sharon didn't get a chance to mention it, just how big your VC is now. What a ginormous bigwig you are in the business world now. Like, in terms of changing that model and what your core values were that emanated from that experience.
Yes, well, MOSAIC, the venture firm, was a $200 million firm. We invest in the pre-CC, Series A, a little bit of Series B companies, and we like to lead rounds, health tech, prop tech, insure tech, a few sports media properties. And so I try to actually stay away from sports. You know, we haven't quite found a way to, I know the data's big, but we haven't quite found a way to monetize it. You know, companies like the wearables, trying to figure out how to monetize those. So we don't do as much sports things, but we're a small piece. If anyone watches the Vince Staples show, is really good, episode 2. Well, he goes in for a bank loan and he needs like $5 million, and he was like, you need your own private island to be a company of this bank. But it's very similar to the worlds that we come from. And I think curiosity is what I've learned can set you apart. And I've read about, you know, the brightest leaders in the world, the brightest investors in the world. And to be a great investor, you have to have a curiosity, because every day you're learning something new. You know, I was looking at this company that's trying to solve for skin cancer, and airlines, you know, through insurance, and you're the provider, and airlines, there's radiation. And so all the folks on that work in the airline industry should have some type of coverage for a possibility of getting skin cancer. I had no idea. We all fly a lot. So we're all susceptible.
No, I'm over here like, wait,
right.
what?
it just threw me off. We were talking backstage about something. I'm like, radiation and airlines, and they're like, how'd you know that? I'm like, how do I know that? Oh, we were doing due diligence on a Monday meeting, and you just getting that information. But for me, going back to your question, how do I get comfortable? I grew up in two worlds, and I spoke about this in my book. I'm not pubbing my book, but
Go ahead.
no, I spoke about this in my
Available
book.
on Amazon.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I came from the inner city, so I grew up like right across the street from the public housing. But when I went to school, I was the only African American male in all my classes, and so when I would hang out with the black kids, I was the nerd. But I would hang out with the white kids. He's the guy that knows all the black kids, and so I just figured out how to navigate those worlds. Like I had teachers say, "Why are you hanging out with that guy?" Like that's my next door neighbor. And then the black kids would be like, "Why do you have straight A's?" And I'd be like, "Cause I get a whooping if I don't have straight A's." And so just navigating those worlds has helped me be comfortable, like Sue said, in terms of not being afraid to learn and to ask a dumb question or whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean, Megan, you've been such an incredible advocate. I think of like all of the pushback for transgender athletes right now, and those are, you always have managed to speak out about things that aren't necessarily popular, right? And you've always had like a very, very strong moral compass in that regard. How do you handle those conversations where you're trying to make people understand, trying to open their minds?
I mean, I think it's a little bit what they're saying about the curiosity, and maybe I'm sort of on the other side of the curiosity, but I think so much of, whether it's, discrimination in sort of any form really comes down to a lack of understanding,
right,
or a misunderstanding or an assumption about something. And certainly with the sort of media machine that we have, and misinformation, and just how much wrong information is out there, it's like people don't even know where they learned that, whatever they think they know about trans athletes or gay athletes or
and you
racism.
get fed information to support what you already believe, unfortunately.
Right. And I think so much about the conversation around trans athletes, I think, was just like particularly absurd to female athletes, because it was like, well, we gotta protect the girls and we gotta protect women's sports. And I'm like,
Where you been?
what? I mean, literally, what? Now we have like Fox News talking about the need to protect women's, this is like, it's the upside down. So I think like approaching it from curiosity and trying to understand where people are coming from, so you're understanding their blind spots, and also just giving our perspective. And then I do, for me, I feel like there is generally a right and a wrong when it comes to this. I come from a place of like, let's just start at human rights and we can work from there. So many of these transgender laws, they're literally affecting like 2 kids. So now you're talking about the power of an entire state government coming down on, Adam, who just wants to play. Like, that's really what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Like, there's not some, sort of floodgate unleashed, and now, 20 million trans kids are playing sports. It's like usually 2 kids that we're talking. So it's not about, my point is, it's not about sports, is it? It's not about the trans kids. It's not, it wasn't about birth control or abortion or any of that. So trying to kind of cut through that, trying to pull the different inequalities together and thread them together to get people understand that this is part of like a larger sort of inequality structure in our country, and trying to, pull those threads for people, so maybe there's something they understand, about one thing that helps them understand about another. But
just try to find something, right, to educate, right? That's
Very
a part of
much.
it. Was there an uphill battle, Sue, that you faced? And I know you were really involved in the collective bargaining agreement, and you were very like a centerpiece of that, and fighting for players' rights in the WNBA. And maybe it wasn't there, but was there like an uphill battle that you could share with us, and kind of how you handled it?
Yeah, well, I think inherently as a woman in sports, as women, and then as women in sports, it's an uphill battle, period. So there's probably 1,000 stories I can tell. Specific to the CBA, I think the biggest challenge was getting mostly the owner's side of things But even some of the players, getting us to think of the CBA, think of the way it's been designed and structured in a different way. That whole like, wait, why do we do this? And then, you know, what's that joke? You come to find out it's like, oh, I don't know, my Uncle Joe 100 years ago did it that way, so we just do it that way. It's like that. So for the WNBA, a lot of what our CBA, a lot of the ways in which it was structured was just based on the NBA, which obviously is like, I don't know how many years the NBA's been around. How many years has it been around?
Oh, good question.
Put you on the spot? We'll come back.
It's
78, yes. Five?
I want to say before, it was before then because they were a league by the time they merged with the ABA. So the ABA-NBA merger was in like 76.
We just finished this top 75 team.
Yeah,
so
2 years
Well, I
ago,
can't
right?
do that math. I'm with Megan on this.
77, 78.
Call it a cool 80.
Okay, 77,
Call it a cool 80.
One of you guys out there, do the math, holler it out.
No, we're at,
Put it on the Googles.
Okay. Anyway,
yeah,
moving on.
So that structure obviously works for them, and they were able to build through 75 plus years.
Right.
Whereas for us in year 20, that wasn't the structure we needed. That wasn't the design we needed. We needed something different. And to
You're
get
dealing with
people to see
women,
it,
with mothers,
that's
and
another,
all
yeah.
sorts of, right?
But to get people to look at it differently in the way that was going to serve us and allow us, our league, to grow, was it was an uphill battle. It was a real challenge. Just because people get really comfortable, even if it's not really working, they get really comfortable with like, but this is how we always do it.
Okay, so what was the strategy that worked?
Just a lot of, I mean, like should I say banging?
Ear banging.
Just in, like, constantly just
Yeah.
drilling, like convincing and drilling. And I think that's when you're in that role, there's an exhaustion that comes with it, and you just have to find a way to power through. And I think the belief and knowing, there was a couple of us on the executive committee, like we knew that there were certain things that we just had to keep banging in order to get it done. And Terry Jackson, our executive director, really helped with that as well.
This, more than an athlete, you know, we hear a lot about that, obviously, and the three of you are prime examples of that. But as an athlete, you know, when people look at a person or meet a person, there's a certain set of biases. And I'm sure there are times when maybe you're with lawyers in a room with the lawsuit, you know, or you're in a business meeting and people are like, well, they're just an athlete. Like, I don't know, did you ever get sort of that pushback where people weren't seeing you as more than what you could do on the field? And how did you handle that?
Interesting for me, I was told no 99% of the time until we won the championship. Because once you win a championship, then you know everything.
Yep.
And then you learn how to brand yourself. Because I think we're the types, and I've known them for quite some time. I watched Sue for quite some time since she was in college. Right. And so I think you know what you're dealing with certain individuals, and I feel like we're the types that we don't really care about the accolades. You know, not about how many whatever we have. It's just we love what we do, but we've learned how to brand ourselves in a manner to actually get the respect that we deserve from others who may not understand what we have to go through to get to where we're at in our worlds. And I tell athletes all the time, we're geniuses in our own rights. You know,
I love that.
I never forget.
Cool.
Isaiah Thomas told me from the Pistons. Isaiah said, you know, the average human being, they react within seconds. Like it may take them 2 seconds to react. We react within thousandths of a second. And then you go across our sports, how many of us come from that professional background? Like there's only been 4,800 NBA players ever. And then it's even less when you go in their fields. And so we're the elite at what we do. And that's not me saying that I'm better than anyone. That just says that I have something to me that differentiates me from the rest of the world. The same as Tim Cook, the same as, you know, Elon Musk, the same as some of our greatest performers, regardless of the craziest things they say. They are like amazing influencers, and they take us to different depths of where we can go.
Hey, look at what Taylor Swift did for the female audience in the NFL, more than anything the NFL could have done on its own. I watched the excruciating documentary about the lawsuit and kind of what you and your you plus 27 other women went through to sue your federation to finally get equal pay. In terms of what is the responsibility of being an athlete? What is the value of being an athlete in those situations? Kind of like what Sue was just saying with the collective bargaining. And then what sort of biases are there against you being an athlete?
I mean, I think the initial sort of bias, especially in that kind of arena, is just that, you know, if you're doing Floyd, like, you don't know how to speak legalese, or
Right.
you don't know the, you know, the system, or you don't know how it's going to sort of go through. And it's like, yeah, I don't. That's why we have lawyers. You know, I don't need to know this. I'm not arguing up there. That's why we have, you know, an incredible PR team, and we had, you know, amazing lawyers to support us. And so I think that's sort of the initial bias. But it's like, I do know what I know. And I know my experience, and I know that we used to be getting 5,000 and now there's 35, and we're not participating in that growth. I do know what my contract is with the federation, and I do know what my personal brand deals are. Those things are totally out of line. I'm like, I can't be paid this to show up for 1 hour and be paid less to show up for the whole year.
Right.
Yeah. So I think just those little things, and kind of trusting yourself. I think something for us as well, I think you guys felt this also, and I think this is part of what is the genius about, you know, athletes and sports, like especially for us being women, sort of fighting this like larger societal battle. We were our permission structure for ourselves. So we were the ones being like, yeah, I don't think we're crazy. Like, we're not crazy. This is happening, right? And we can take confidence from that from ourselves. And I think when the times that we stuck together the most, I mean, it's pretty amazing. The lawsuit, just the entire equal pay kind of fight lasted, I mean, 6-7 years.
And through COVID.
Through COVID, through everything, through losses, which maybe my lack of knowledge of, you know, the criminal justice system, or the justice system that we were going through was a benefit, because I was like, well, it doesn't really seem like that big of an L. We're just going to keep moving. There's like there's another step. There's a perseverance. There's a determination.
That's a good athlete traits, though, right?
Yeah,
They make you a
definitely.
great athlete,
like,
right?
we lose all the time. I mean, we were, you know, I think some
Right.
people were like, oh, that's kind of embarrassing. You guys lost in California. And we were like, oh, I don't know. We're just going to the next state. So I think there was a sense of perseverance, but also that, you know, collectiveness with each other, that basically for 7 years, we stayed on message, we stayed on brand, we stayed collective. No one was sort of stepping outside of that. And like, ultimately, we knew we were right. We knew what we felt. We knew we were being underpaid, and it was just a matter of time before that was gonna, you know, come to bear.
Man, it's so emotional, you know, everything that you guys went through, and not being able to see each other in person during a lot of that was really, I'm sure was really difficult too. Why must we push? If we're an athlete, if we're, you know, something else, not everybody here is obviously, you guys are the elite of the elite, but to push to be in that decision-making role as an athlete, why was that so critical?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of it's been touched on. I've never used genius. I might have to steal that.
I love that.
I would always say, I'm an expert. I have industry knowledge. Like, I would try to use words that I feel like people in the world of business are familiar with, because that's the truth. I have a 20+ year, I mean, if you want to include college, I mean, I've been doing my sport since I was 6 years old. So that is, I won't tell you my age now, but that is years of understanding something, of being in locker rooms, being on teams, being buses, different coaches, different countries, different cities, you name it. All of that. I mean, what does Andrea call the guy that works in her firm, and he's like older? There's a term. I should have looked it up. A friend of ours works at like private equity, and she was like, yeah, there's this like older guy, he's like 65. There's a like operating something. There's a term for it. I'll tweet it later. What?
Operating partner, maybe?
Our operating partner, where like he just gets to like come in, share some knowledge.
Like he's like, I get
and then
that.
he gets to just
See the
like,
deal flow.
do his thing, and then he gets to leave. And it's like after really long sports careers, that's who we are in those rooms. We get to walk. That's who we should be in those rooms. We get to walk into meetings. Name the type of meeting. It could be a CBA type meeting. It could be meetings with brands. It could be a media rights type of thing. We get to walk in and bring that expertise, that genius, that knowledge that nobody else has. And yet they're the ones making decisions for us.
Right.
How our leagues are going to run or how our teams are going to run, but you're not going to get our input. I mean, if I were to change the title from athlete to something else, it'd be crazy to not have those people in the room.
Right.
The ones that actually know what it's like and actually have, like I said, this opinion that goes way further. And then I think to your point, you have to have diversity as well. because you have to understand what it's like for everyone. You know,
Yeah,
whoever's going to be impacted.
Yeah, can you just expand on that? Because that's.
Oh, diversity is.
Yeah.
Of learning common sense isn't common. But I think when you speak in their terms, and when I found the stat that companies who have a more diverse board bring in more revenue, a higher percentages on a profit loss sheet, all across the board. And so it's at.
It seems like a no-brainer.
I am
but-
so
good
confused
business.
that
I know. It's good
why,
business.
Yeah.
you know, everyone knows, you know, like how CAC and LTV can tell you how long before you get to where you need to be to scale, to be private, I mean, to IPO, to, you know, become the next incumbent. But it's like that isn't a common thing that's known, and it's mind-blowing. And so a part of our firm, we have 2, 5, and 10-year plans in terms of like how your company should look in terms of who you hire, so it is diverse, and how it is reflective in who you're serving. You know, my community, especially African Americans, are the largest consumer spenders, say like per capita, not in grand total, in totality, because we are a minority, but we buy the most. I like to say, can you say shit here?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I like to say we buy the most shit, but the
you go.
consumer brands, we're not represented in the decision making. And so I'm thinking, well, how do you know how you're serving, who's buying the most from you? Which we're all trying to build a product, and we have AI now is telling us how to roll out our product to serve those who are consuming it. And so it's mind-boggling why you wouldn't have everybody you're trying to reach, which in sports, we're trying to reach everyone. So everyone should be participating in terms of how the decisions are being made.
I mean, it's like reflective of a team, right? Like you're not going to have like all players the same. You're not going to put 5 centers on a basketball
I
team.
say that all the
5 people.
time. I'm like,
oh, you
if they were-
do?
this is like, you're stealing my
Oh,
line.
yay.
Stealing my line. Hannah.
Okay.
I'm like,
Go ahead. It's like,
I've had like a wildly successful career. 5 of me, we'd be trash.
right.
We'd be a terrible basketball team.
Right. Right.
Be a lot of thinking,
Yeah.
overthinking. I have an opinion. You always
Overthinking.
Yeah, no, but truly.
Yeah, and Megan, from your experience, because we talk about diversity all the time, but like on a really practical, like grassroots level, how essential is it from your experience?
I mean, it's, I think, the most essential part. I mean, I think we get a broad swath of people in sports just naturally because it's just the best athletes are going to come. So you get people from different backgrounds. But I always think about it like we think of the table, and you need to have a diverse table. And it's, you know, sort of what Sue was saying. Like I feel like I know a lot, but only about what I know, and only through my experience. And everything I know is put through these 2 lenses. That's it. So I can bring a lot, but I have no idea what he's going to think about something in a completely different way. I mean, we run into this all the time. We think, I know. It's,
What do you mean? Like, give me an example.
yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about it in couples therapy later, but just like the way that we think about, you know, branding a player. And I'll be like, oh, this is so obvious, we should do it this way. And then I get a different perspective from her. And then we get something that neither of us would have thought of.
Oh,
and we get
okay.
something better.
Yeah.
So I think the diversity around the table, the point is that so you can capture the most perspective in the world, so you can, you know, create the best product or, you know, whatever you're doing. You have the most information you possibly can have to serve the widest range of people, and that is what's good about, that is why it's good for business. That's how you're going to get a better product. That's how you're going to see something that you wouldn't be able to see just yourself, or if you have, you know, 12 people sitting around a boardroom that are all looking exactly the same. You're missing out on a huge part of information and experience, and just, you know, the thing that everybody has in their life that you go through and you experience, then now you can bring, you know, a different perspective to the table. And without that, you're missing out on a lot. Like you were saying about, it's like better for business. Like that is like across the board. We know this.
Yeah, it's a fact.
Now to have more diverse, you know, opinions and people and perspectives and needs in the boardrooms and in these decision making just makes everything you're doing better.
And if that's what it takes, just data to convince people, well, then so be it. You know, if they're not gonna come around to that on their own and say this is the smart thing to do, you know, the proof is in the profit, I guess. When you're talking about a sea change, like a culture change, especially in the VC world, I mean, what are your core values as an investor? And how do you see that world beginning to change to incorporate more people in the Black community?
No. So I actually had a job while I was playing for Comcast Ventures. And not too many folks know about it, but I headed up the Catalyst Fund. The Catalyst Fund was for underfunded communities, so African American, Latinx, and female founders. And as a venture capitalist, you want to spread your bets as wide as possible. You want to cast a wide net. But what we found that there's not enough from those communities because they don't have the incentive to actually become founders, that we just couldn't cast a net as wide as we would like to. And so if you can't hedge enough bets, then your return is less likely to be, to give back the multiples that you plan for it to. And so we just extended it another layer, and we said to ourselves, okay, what if we went out and found companies that served these communities in a better, more efficient way than ever before? And so we just cast the net in a different light, but just still stuck to our core and how you're serving to the communities that aren't particularly served in the manner that they should be. And so that was just something that I've always held close to my vest whenever I think about how I invest in something.
Yeah, you have to go like next level, right, and be thoughtful about it. I know that you work with companies and in pretty significant roles in terms of diversity, right? And you have said that it is companies that are, and I'm paraphrasing, but they are the bedrock of change in that regard. What have you found? What are you seeing, and what are you passionate about?
I think the leadership is really important because we can, talk about diversity, and we can talk about hearing different voices and, sort of changing the way we do business. But if your boss isn't doing it, nobody's doing it. Nobody's incentivized to do it. And especially if it's something where you're going against your boss, now you're just putting yourself in a position to
lose your
get
job.
Fired. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, to get moved on from. Yeah. There's probably a lot of ways that that people fire people under them just because they don't like what they're saying. So I think leadership is huge, and you really have to believe in it. I don't always know the ways to get everybody to believe in it, but if profit, particularly in America, isn't the reason, like there's going to be no other stronger incentive, clearly. So I think continuing to show that, like Andre said too, invest in communities that, maybe certain communities aren't ready right now to have the same return as other communities who have been invested in for generations and for literally hundreds of years. But, invest in almost like the business around their business. Okay, now we can start to see, that sort of growth. I think that's really important. And then I think also just like Sue and I feel this and talk about it all the time, just our own personal experience doesn't match up with diversity not working. And we have this expertise in this particular area, whether that's in women's sports, how to brand, how to market, how to talk about it, what lens to put it through, like what's going to hit, what's not. Like some things from men's sports works, some things don't work at all. And so we can understand what we can take from there and leave the rest, and then we can use our expertise and understanding, to help companies basically make money, which you're paying the athlete, but you're also want your return. And if you're not branding, marketing, and doing all those things in the right ways, you're never going to get to that number that you ultimately want.
You have to be a lot more creative, right? And you have to be purposeful, I think. So you have to have in mind, right, what your end goal is and say, well, this is how we're going to get there. We're going to figure it out. And Sue, you started with some fellow athletes together, which is a company which is it's getting some e-commerce now, right? Yeah. But also it is really trying to put women's sports at the forefront, right, in terms of coverage and the like. I probably didn't describe it as well as you can. What was the gap that you saw? Who was being underserved? Why did you start this company? And what has been the impact?
Yeah, obviously, women's sports isn't covered in the same ways, and there's tons of data and numbers to prove it. I think we all know it at this point. You don't even have to pull out the actual numbers. At the time, I think we were getting 4% of like the larger media coverage, piece of the pie. And so it was Alex Morgan. It's Alex Morgan, myself, Chloe Kim, and Simone Manuel. But it was really Alex Morgan. That was the first call that I took, and she was like basically describing it like, we don't have the coverage, so why don't we do it? because we complain about it. That was my thing. I was like, oh, I've been complaining about this for years. Yeah. So now it's time to put, my money where my mouth is. So let's do something
women
about
from
it.
4 different sports.
4 different sports, right? And really just be able to tell different stories, shine the light in different ways. To piggyback off, what Megan was just talking about in terms of companies being change makers, I actually think they are in one way. I think when it comes to culture, athletes and leagues, I mean, think about, like, when did you guys take COVID seriously? When the NBA shut down?
Yeah.
Like, athletes and leagues, like, we represent so much because of the diversity, because of our experiences. We are a mirror to society in a lot of ways. And so when you think of, women in sports, you think of our leagues, the lack of this, the lack of that, the lack of this. I think every woman is impacted by that in their own way. This isn't really on topic, but a little bit. When our CBA came out and we had 100% maternity leave. I mean, I had women from all industries be like, wow, seeing that, now I can go take that to my boss.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and because we're, cameras are in front of us, microphones are in front of us, it's really important. And so to bring it back to Togethxr, to be able to tell those stories, shine those lights, both in, at times, more serious ways, sometimes just telling a cool story. Because you need those too.
Right. And you're talking about creating a dialogue. Is that right? About things that are important, that touch all women.
That's definitely a part of it. That's what's, I think the beauty of Togethxr is you can get a little bit of everything. Like I said, some serious stuff where you might do a deep dive, maybe a dialogue around NIL and women's basketball and the misconceptions there. Or just like a dope athlete doing really cool things. Ajay Johnson, she's a rapper and a basketball player.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Cover that too.
Yeah, and it's funny because we talk about things that are sort of worldwide languages as well, and we have music and we have sports, really, right? That people around the world are passionate about. You invested in Leeds FC, correct?
Yes.
And you invested in in Bay Area FC,
yes.
Right? Which is very cool. So it's all coming back to soccer. You mentioned women. I'm curious as to why you felt that it was important to invest in a women's soccer team.
Well, I think it covers every reason why, you put money into something. We put our money into our kids because you want them to grow and be successful and want them to be thought leaders and change makers. And hopefully you get a return on them at some point too, where you don't have to, you don't have to pay for the food anymore. And then
I'm still waiting for that one.
Or they put you in the correct retirement home. Right. But I'm saying all that to say, obviously I think the Women's Soccer League has the potential, and I think is the growth trajectory to be of like a major sport. You got the major 4, now you say major 5, and I think women's soccer is that league where you always want a place where you get the top talent in the world to compete. We were talking about golf earlier and how LIV and the PGA is kind of hurting golf because I don't know where to go to find the best golf because it's so fragmented. And so
Interesting.
The opportunity alone, doing research on where most professional women's soccer players come from, the area. And then there was this one thing that just, I think, set it off for me. And it was Sheryl Sandberg starting up a women's leadership initiative within the club. And there's a statistic that girls who participate in sports and go D1 are more likely to be CEOs.
C-suite.
C-suite, just across the board.
That's right.
And that alone was like, whoa, now that's how you create change. And you talk about like what grassroots are for. And so it's like, okay, we got to invest in our youth because it's going to make our product better as they grow and they, you track along the way. And so that there alone, and now it's
so funny to hear that you've just learned this.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
And we have, this has been like our whole lives.
Yeah.
Right. No, but that's cool.
I
love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love
The
it.
short answer, you're a genius.
I love you're a genius.
Why are you investing in women's soccer?
He's a
You're
genius.
a genius.
I'm a genius.
I mean, when you hear Andre talk about soccer, right, and how critical it is in the future of soccer, like what are you seeing in terms of where we are now with women's soccer, and where would you like to see it go?
I think where we are now, something really, I think, important is that the sort of proverbial foot off the neck. It's not just that women's sports have been underfunded, they've been suppressed.
Right.
Intentionally or, sort of neglected. So for me, I feel like it's like, oh, okay, we're gonna stop actively suppressing you. And the sport has been growing over a number of years. Obviously, the national team has been a huge part of that and been very successful, but you're starting to see that around the world. Right. And now, which is amazing, it's also a little bit frustrating because I think like now, you know, all of this money is coming in, which is great. I'm like all for the growth, but it's like, literally welcome to the party. Like we've been here for so long, not you, but like there's so much money coming in, which is amazing. I think the valuation's going up. Yep. And you know, to touch on your point about live and where do you find the best golf, I mean, that was always my argument. It's like the MLS has been around, and no shade to the MLS, they've been around for a long time, literally billions of dollars of investment. Mm-hmm. It's maybe the 10th best league in the world. It is not going to attract the top talent anytime soon in their prime. No, it really, I mean, the best soccer is played in Europe, whether that's, you know, Spain or Germany or England, obviously.
La Liga, Premier League.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So,
right.
so what are we talking? Oh, so it's entertainment, right? Sports is entertainment. Period. Point blank. And obviously, we do our craft within it, and it's an amazing space for us to do this thing that we're so talented in. Women's sports, WNBA and the NWSL, by far the best talent in the world in so many ways. And they are some of the best leagues. Certainly the WNBA is the best league in the world, and I think the NWSL is right there with, you know, a couple of leagues, but top to bottom are the most competitive leagues. So you're getting the very best, and you're getting to capitalize on women's sports in America, which has always been, you know, underfunded, but way better funded than the rest of the world. So there's a better infrastructure there.
And more culturally accepted than a lot of other countries.
And I think for brands also, and sort of the larger business around women's sports, what you get when you come to women's sports, you're going to get the top talent, you're going to get an amazing product on the field. And then we're going to get to talk about, you know, healthcare, and then we're going to talk about maternity leave, and then we're going to talk about racial justice, and we're going to talk about trans athletes, and we're going to talk about gay athletes, and we're going to talk about an environment that we're actually changing the world just by existing on the field so many times. Like there's so much diversity, and there's so many interesting stories, and there's so many different kind of people, and because it all intersects through us all the time, we're passionate about it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to get involved in the community. You can, you know, go to an NWSL game and you can be openly queer, and you could bring your family, and you could buy a great T-shirt because you're definitely going to support. You're going to buy the T-shirt. You're going to get a great atmosphere, and you're going to get to see some of the best entertainment in that particular sector on the field at the same time. So I'm like just screaming for the like this is amazing, all the investment that's happened, to be able to capitalize particularly on 2019 and breaking that open, and you know, not just for little girls but for boys as well, to see that and to change the narrative.
That's really
something
powerful.
That's just been like categorically untrue, but just this thing that we keep saying all the time is women's sports isn't popular. It's like, well, it is, and it's just been suppressed, and now that sort of business opportunity has caught up to what we've been saying for a millennia.
And it feels like, because we're talking about money here and business, and you mentioned NIL, and we see people like Livy Dunn, and we see Caitlin Clark, and we see Angel Reese, and I mean, women's basketball at the collegiate level has absolutely exploded. I know hosting SportsCenter, it doesn't even compare. I mean, the coverage doesn't, it's exponentially more coverage now. You do, you know, Sue's Places on ESPN Plus, watch.
Yeah. We are plugging that. We are plugging
awesome. That. She did Caitlin Clark, that was great. Where do you see basketball in this regard? Because to me, it's just looking at it from my view, it's like full steam ahead now with basketball, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, so I would have answered this question probably like couple of years ago, and I would have said that the true story of the WNBA in its first, let's call it 20 years, was that we were able to stay relevant in terms of our play on the court. That's only gotten better and better. That we were able to stay afloat in a lot of ways without the investment. So the story was like, look, we did that without investment. Now imagine we had it, which is basically, you know, piggybacking off what Megan is saying. And also, I jokingly call you the genius, but that was like my pitch to people the last couple of years. Whatever rooms I was in, tell me about a WNBA team, like what would that look like? And I'm like, you're gonna be a genius in 5 years. Get in now, it'll be cheaper, and you're going to look like a savior genius in 5 years. And that to me is really the story about the WNBA, because it's now we're at the point where it is the moment. It actually is. It's you can feel it, the coverage in and of itself, with the players, the way they're like they have an understanding of the business. Whereas like when I was in college, my first couple of years, I didn't really understand.
Well, they're business people. They're dealing with companies now, right, because of NIL.
Yeah,
So
I know it's sad, but
Yeah.
me and Diana Taurasi, we joke all the time. He and I joke. We're like, we're the shut up and dribble face, like
Yeah. I know.
It's true. Like but we didn't know. We were just like, yeah, I'm
Right.
happy to be dribbling. You know?
Right, exactly.
But now well, obviously we're well past shut up and dribble, but younger athletes in the WNBA, younger athletes
some
in
people.
women's college, like they understand. They see the business, they see the opportunity, and they understand how they can participate. And
That's
gonna be
power
the
too.
change.
That's power, right? Which comes from different places. Andre, if there's something you want to see happen here, like let's look from now, 5 years ahead. For some people it's scary. Oh my God, where's AI going? But on and on and on. But for someone like you that's very forward thinking, what do you want to see happen in the next couple of years?
I want us to appreciate competitiveness in our sports. 'Cause I think right now we're teetering too far towards the profitability of things, and we're making rules around our sports surrounded by how much money can we make off it versus the rules around the purity of the sport. Because if you get the purity of the sports right, the profits will always come.
Are we talking referees? What are we talking here? What are we What are we
talking about?
What are we talking about?
I've been very collaborative
I know. Well,
in my efforts.
So you're going to be head. You are now the first ever player to be the executive director
Yes.
of the NBPA. So he is doing. Sue talked about the collective bargaining. So you're right there.
Yes.
Now you're going to be able to fight for the players in such a powerful role. So anyway, continue. So
because-
let people know that.
You know, but I think for me, sometimes I have to take a step back and say, what am I fighting for? Or sometimes, like, am I fighting or am I being collaborative with this particular thing? Okay, because the goal of it all is to grow the pot. Because if you grow the pot, everyone, gets what they need to get. The players' revenues go up, and then obviously Adam, he serves the ownership groups, and so, fiduciary responsibility to them, their profits go up. And so it's we put on all these systems, and the one thing I've always spoken to, the NBA is the most forward tech league of all our leagues in the world. We always say that, social following, engagement with our fans, but there's some pros and there's some cons to it. The cons are like every decision we make is under a microscope, and so sometimes I think we cater too much to the noise because they're the consumer. And the customer's always right. The best CEOs say the exact opposite.
Yeah.
The customer doesn't know what they want at all. And so I think
Interesting.
And we always talk about what's wrong with our game. We got to get it hit. This area was good. This area was good. No, this was good. There's too much offense. There's not enough defense. And
All-star game.
Right, we're trying to solve for that. Right. And so I think the key of it all is to, how do we put the best product out there? And sometimes it doesn't show up in the form of return on an investment. What we put into our grassroots, what we're teaching our kids. I love the NIL, but how can we make sure that doesn't hinder a 19, 20, 21-year-old decision making? Like, you probably shouldn't be driving a Ferrari or a Bentley when you're in college, but you probably should, you can get your money, but make sure you're equipped with the financial acumen to make the right decisions based on where you are in life, and then your trajectory of where you'll be 20 years from being a 20-year-old kid on a college campus, because there is an incentive to be a kid and experience things as a college student.
In a way, though, it could help students stay in college longer, right? If they're
Yes.
making money, particularly young women. Megan, for you, I just pose the same question as what you really want to see here in the next couple of years, something that you're very passionate about in terms of change.
I want to see the media coverage around women just be opened up and really be invested in. I mean, I think you said it earlier, maybe 4% of all media coverage goes to women's sports. So it's like, I don't want to know every single thing about LeBron James, but I do, because I hear it. I know that Bronny James is averaging 5 points in college. I don't watch men's college basketball. I hope the kid does great, but I'm like, why do I know this, all of this information? But the storylines and the sort of other part of sports. Of course, people like turning on the game and they like watching it, but you like to know that, oh, Andre, he's really into investing. Oh, that's interesting. And then he's going out there and he's playing, and now I can understand a greater part of him. Now his story is richer to me. So I think around women's sports, we just see so little. And then when it is spoken about, on the major platforms, often,
like at the Olympics, I feel like that's when it's really blown out and the stories are told and everything.
Right, and you get all the backstories and people get involved and get invested and then they're watching. So if we can do that for women's leagues, in terms of like a 24/7, conversation that's around, now you have more engagement. Now people understand on a deeper level. So much of the information even out there is such a surface level. You're missing a lot of the nuance, and so people don't understand. Oftentimes it works in concert with the existing inequalities because you're not really putting that much effort into it. So I feel like the media space can really blow women's sports up in a huge way. And then from there, we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see how it goes.
They will come.
Yeah,
right.
I bet everything that it's coming.
Yeah,
I have no doubt about that. But I think the sort of the main network media space, but then also just the ability, whether it's podcasts or shows or just the more information, that is really going to drive the audience and the engagement and the brands. And what we know about female athletes for sure, we may not have the. And I'm stealing this from you.
I'm literally sitting here like,
you're going to wrap it up.
Steal my
All right, you say.
Okay,
you say
go
it better
ahead.
than I do. You say it better than I do.
To be continued.
No, I can't even pull it.
I don't even know what you're going to say, so say it.
The engagement versus reach. Go. You
Okay,
say.
tell us. Sue,
go.
This is our mind meld that happens.
this is.
We spend so much time together.
Can you tell? Right.
This is not what I was going to say, so I would love for you to finish it, and then I will add what I was going to say.
We're just saying, it's just we know this about female athletes. Sometimes the reach isn't as much as male athletes, obviously, but the engagement is off the charts. Like people are
passionate.
They're passionate. The people that know women's sport, they really know it. So they're coming to the game. They're bringing their family. They're buying the shirt. They're getting season tickets. They're following the players. They're buying their merch. They're listening to their podcast. It's like people are really in on those stories, but we just have so little of that available around, all of the different leagues around women and particular athletes. That to me is like just a wide open frontier.
What I would add,
which I got.
Yes. Same question. What I would add is yes, and I would love to see in the world of the coverage, whether it's someone like yourself, Hannah, although you're killing it, so you're the exception to this. Whether it's podcasts, different shows, we need to have women. And we need to have former athletes hosting those shows. Because a lot of times when
producing those shows and directing those shows.
Yes. It circles back to that industry knowledge. Circles back to that industry knowledge. That's how you're going to get the story told right. That's how you're going to be able to pull back the layers and not just know a stat or where we went to college or the year we won a championship, but maybe like something that happened in the in-between time that got us to that point. And I think when you start to pull those layers, that engagement only increases. And then I think the reach will increase as well, because that is what people are interested in, right? Like you bring up LeBron. We jokingly talk about LeBron a lot, but he's such a great example of Taco Tuesday. We all knew he was eating tacos on Tuesday. It's like you don't even have to be a basketball fan, you knew it. But it all plays into it. It's a part of a persona and somebody who has a certain status, who you might want to strive to be like. And that really plays into fandom, I think.
Yeah, aspirational. Inspirational.
Right, and
the more of those stories we can tell, which the three of you embody. Our audience has some questions, so we just have about a few more minutes to do this. When you think about the next generation of change makers that will follow in your footsteps, I love this question. Where will we see? We just said what we want to see. Where will we see the largest revolution, Andre?
Oh, that is a great.
That's cool, right?
Well, I
I'm
mean,
going to make you make a prediction here.
They're the four mothers. We say forefathers. They're the four mothers of The revolution, and I think it will come from women's sports because there is something that I've seen, and you were talking about making sure that the former athletes were telling the stories, and I think of Danielle Slayton, who is the founder of Bay FC. She was part of the founding team, and we've never seen that in sports where actual former athletes founded the club, set it up, the LLC, the whole structure of things, and went out and raised money, and then like saw it the whole way through. I don't think we've seen that before, and so, as basketball players or our community in general, what we've been talking about is, generational wealth and owning, our own IP. And they were the first ones to do that, and it's just been a wonderful thing to see. And I think we're just at the beginning of stages of that. Yeah. And it's just going to set a trend.
And whenever you engage in a business relationship, making sure that you protect your intellectual property it's critical. I'm going to just, because I want to do, how should we start educating, Megan, the next generation about the importance of diversity, inclusion, and I like this question because how do we incorporate it into youth sports? So having people,
Yeah.
That's a tough question.
I mean, I think, so much is what you see. So if you're seeing, more diversity, whether it's, on TV or at the games, or, you're a little kid and you go to a Bay game and, the founders get honored before the game, and it's, Danielle and it's Brandy and it's, Allie, and it's like that right there, for little kids, for little boys and little girls, and, anybody in between, like that is really powerful. I think we're going to see that a lot. I think, sort of going on both questions about the revolution, we talked about earlier how women who play sports at the collegiate level are so much more likely to be in the C-suite position. And you're going to see that a lot more, not just in women's sports, but I think just in general in sports. You're going to see, the more women play and the more that we have that experience, now we can take that back into the sport that we love. Like obviously, there's this many people that get to be a professional athlete. It's such a small percentage of people. But what if the rest of the people who played with you in college are now the ones running the team? Like that's going to be really important. And of course with sports, you get a lot of diversity because it's just the best. Right. It's just the best people. And then we can sort of use that to, look down. And obviously in soccer, we have a kind of a pay to play model and problem, really, in a lot of ways. There's a lack of diversity because it's such a rich sport. Right. So there's a lot more emphasis on, I think widening that. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I feel like having so many former athletes who know the system, who grew up in it, being able to come back and use their expertise, not only as an athlete, but now as a C-suite member, can really work to change that and to put diversity at the forefront and sort of at the foundation of kind of the next phase of sports that we're building right now.
It's impacting boys and girls.
Boys and girls, yeah, absolutely.
And sadly, girls leave sports in droves in their early teens when they become very conscious of gender differences and what being an athlete and what that looks like. And or the two of you know this well, and Andre, you probably do too, because you're a genius. Yeah. But girls leave sports at a certain age in droves, and we have to work really hard to keep them in, and help them understand what it does for them in the classroom in terms of their body image, in terms of business in so many ways. I think that's a fight that we need to have. Sue, the last question is, this person said, you mentioned how fighting for change can be exhausting, and it is. What advice do you have for those of us in the audience who want to drive change and make the industry more inclusive, but obviously with this being a kind of a young audience as well in a lot of respects, but they aren't in a senior level of power? So what's your best advice?
I just think power in numbers. The thing that I've learned, or that I learned the most from the CBA negotiations, being on that executive committee, and really my time in the WNBA from 2016 when the Minnesota Lynx were wearing some T-shirts that were protesting police brutality. This was pre-Colin Kaepernick, pre-Megan kneeling.
Yep.
They did that, and it had impact. But what we learned was, if we had all done that, if 144 players had done that on the same day at the same time, it would have been it just would have gone way further, been way bigger. We figured that out in 2020, and I think that's why.
The bubble.
Yeah, and that's why there's actually a senator in Georgia that got elected there.
WNBA save the nation.
That's right.
That's part of it. So back to my advice would just be find people who are just as passionate. Power in numbers. That's how you make, that's how you create the change. That's how you make the change. And then from there, the exhaustion piece, man, lean on each other. That's the time where, every now and then, another thing I learned in my CBA negotiations, there were times as a white player, I wasn't as tired. It wasn't as impacting me as much. So there were times where some of my black peers were like, yo, can you take this one? And I started to kind of figure out, when was it time for me to be more vocal, take the reins a little bit? And then there were times where it's like, okay, as the white player, now I got to back up. Now it's a little bit different. And just kind of, again, finding people that are like-minded in that way and have similar aspirations and goals in terms of change, and then lean on each other.
That's great advice. Thank you, all three geniuses, for being here today. It was incredible. We could go on, but you guys have put together an awesome conference with a lot more. So thank you for being a fantastic audience.
Thank you.